What is truth? Is the question Pontius Pilate posed during his meeting with Christ during the events of his trial. Within the context of this interaction, Pilate posed his question as a rhetorical one, not intending to receive any answer for it. While Pilate may have been posturing as being self-assured, the situation he found himself in was quite stressful and a clear source of personal conflict, both legally and morally speaking. Pilate found Christ guilty of no crime and had no personal desire to see him put to death. This leads to him attempting to compromise with the people, offering up Barabbas as a substitute, yet this falls through. In response, the people state, were Pilate to let Christ go free, they would report to Rome that he is harboring an upstart rebel and that he is no longer a friend of Caesar. This is a genuine threat to Pilate, as legally speaking, Rome would have no reason to side with Pilate over the claims set against him, as the law has been turned on him. Additionally, the Roman emperor at the time, Tiberius, had murdered his advisor Sejanus 2 years prior. Sejanus, who also held the title of being a friend to Caesar. This scenario presents a couple of messages. What is truth? Oftentimes, truth can be defined by whoever has the power to define it. And objective truth, while not negotiable, demands a response to its presence, whether positive or negative. In regard to legality, sometimes the law may be used to enact a change that is good, but it could also be used to inflict evil. Both Pilate and the people invoked the power of the law, and yet both had different intentions in doing so. While a law is an objective truth or rule of sorts, its usage may twist and turn depending on who the enforcer of said law is. And what if the law is presented as the highest truth there is, held more sacred than anything else? Then the situation gets even more convoluted. Enter tyranny, where these questions are not only present, but play a big role in the core of the game itself. You are a Fatebinder, an enforcer and determinant of all things legal and illegal, working at the behest of Tunon's court and Kairos' ever-expanding empire. Kairos has conquered every nation on Tyrannus, and the Tiers is the empire's last stop, and luckily for you, that's exactly where you are being sent. You are tasked with helping Kairos' main forces, the Disfavored and the Scarlet Chorus, bring a final end to the rebels of the Tiers. Throughout your journey, you'll be forced to consider what is truth, what is legal, what is right, what is power. Let's get underway. Tyranny is easily one of my favorite RPGs of all time. I believe that for anyone looking to get into RPGs, it makes for an amazing starting point. Having played it 3 different times, back to back to back for this video, on top of the 2 playthroughs I've done in the past, there's a lot to talk about. Allow me to introduce our 3 participants for today's video. Fatebinder 1, Andrew von Clarion, main Fatebinder for this video and resident self-insert. He believes in good ends, but not necessarily good means. While he's content to serve under Kairos, he often finds himself wondering if he couldn't do better, though whether this is due to some genuine talent or pure narcissism is anybody's guess, really. His build is a mix of grave and emotion magic paired with heavy armor and 2-handed weapons, with a bit of sword and board in there thrown into the mix. Fatebinder 2 is Bryn, a by-the-book soldier who through sheer luck ended up under the service of the court rather than just being another grunt on the field of battle. His love for the Empire is less about Kairos themselves, but more about pride for the North, where he hails from, and who will entirely crush out any resistance that rises against the Empire, as a threat to the Empire is a threat to the North itself. While he may not hate his enemies, he certainly spares no sympathy for them if they pose even a semblance of a threat. His build is a skirmisher, dual-wielding blades and using bows to pick off enemies at range, As a soldier, he finds magic is best saved for those who lack any actual martial skill, and so is entirely useless in that field. Last but not least, we have Fjord Clawchild, a man raised by beastmen and women. He's always felt that his recruitment into the court was this long-running, unfunny joke that he could never really see the punchline of. The only reason he hasn't been summarily executed prior to going to the tiers is because if he's going to die, he wants to die causing as much real pain to the Overlord as possible, not to merely go out like a slight breeze, but rather a raging tempest. His loyalties lie nowhere, as he is arguably more beast than man in spirit. His build is a light-armored brawler, sporting various offensive spells to bolster his control of the battlefield. These here Fatebinders are going to serve as recurring variations for this video, each helping me showcase the different possibilities in this game, from the story, to the roleplay, to the background, all the way down to combat builds. Tyranny is shorter than many other RPGs, but it offers a lot of variety in how you approach it as a sort of trade-off. Lastly, given just how much the setting and themes present in the game are well present throughout the experience, I'll be dividing the story section into two, one with spoilers and one without. I think that covers everything, so let's get started. The game has a great visual palette. This is one of the few RPGs that I know of that takes place in a Bronze Age setting, yet it finds a way to offer a variety of different locales on top of that. Walking through places ravaged by edicts, such as the Citadel being engulfed in fire and lava, Stalwart being this place of violent storms and jagged, rusted terrain and equipment, or Azure's rocky, fractured locales of constant quakes that shake the earth. The various lands all portray what were once beautiful or grand places utterly cast down by the war Kairos has brought. There are still remnants of what the tiers once was. Tunon's Court is an example of this, but there's this air of conquest about it, like change is being thrust upon the very ground you tread. And then there's the old walls and the spires, which are unlike anything that both the Tiersmen and the Empire have managed to build. Ancient and mysterious, a visual reminder that there were people here before you, and that you are just another footnote in the long thread of history. Even the UI elements have this rusted and oxidized bronze look to it, like it too is in need of reforging into something new. The map you use to travel across the tiers portrays the destruction that has transpired across it.
I type OMW and it's for on my way, and it types capital on my way exclamation point.
Oh, so it's got a little bit of a flair.
On my way. On the
I'd say the environments are akin to a grounded setting that's been forcibly transformed into something that can be downright unnatural or even horrifying at times. The various factions even reflect the setting in their dispositions through their looks. The disfavored are a unified force, uniformed and wielding iron weapons, representing the technological changes occurring in the Empire and the disciplined might of Kairos' armies. The Scarlet Chorus are all over the place, using practically anything they can get their hands on. The Chorus recruit anyone they can find and maintain cohesion through blatant gang violence, so it makes sense their troop equipment is whatever you could pick up at the time. The Rebels are composed of various individual groups, each with their own unique looks. Visually, everything's really good, though maybe not the Bane, more like the bane of this game, am I right?
Boo! You stink!
Anyways, I'll talk more about the Bane later. Let's ignore them for now. For the basic sound effects, it's your standard RPG affair. Nothing noteworthy, but nothing remarkable either. Though I suppose there's really only so many ways you could try to make looting a container sound unique. The combat, dialogue, and music are just where the game really delivers. Combat sounds brutal. Every cut, stab or smash sounds impactful, spells sound intense in their casting. When a powerful blow is done to you or by you, you'll both see it and hear it.
I'm not here to make friends.
We should try that again. Come and feast my iron!
Destroy him!
Wait my signal.
I'm not sure if I'm overthinking this or if I'm just making it up in my head, I guess. But some RPGs don't put an emphasis on just how brutal combat is, I feel. Almost like the characters are fighting in a sparring match rather than literally frantically fighting just for the chance to wake up tomorrow. I would say the music is a mix of different themes. Primarily foreboding triumph, intrigue, with some pieces that almost seem to give the idea that there's hope things will ultimately reach a happy conclusion. While the combat tracks are good, they do get very repetitive, given just how much
Less talking, more reading!
justice you have to bring to the tiers. I do think it would have been nice to have a bit more variety in there. My favorite track is easily a tie between the Spire and Tunon's Court. The Spire kind of feels like the aftermath of a storm. It starts off as this base of victory and conquest, but high notes of peace work their way up to the surface, like the track is audibly recounting what it took to claim where you are now. Tunon's Court is almost like a stasis of sorts. The track also has that sort of tranquility to it, like what's happening outside is condensed down into a polite disagreement in court, but it's almost suffocating in a way, like the tension is being held by force rather than allowed to be relieved.
Yes.
If you've played an isometric RPG before, you probably know that not every NPC is voice acted, and even major characters that have voice acting typically don't have it for every line of dialogue. What's here though is really, really good.
You call yourselves officers of Kairos' army, but your conduct falls short of my expectations. The court finds your accounts of Vendrian's well lacking, rife with misdirection and fallacy, fouled with baseless accusation.
I could sit and listen to Tunon talk about Kairos' laws for hours. There are some parts that don't have voice acting that arguably should, and then there are some lines deep into a conversation tree that have voice acting, and then it goes away again after that. So the game can be a bit inconsistent as to what gets voice work and what doesn't. In combat, every isometric RPG has to choose between the two ancient paths: real-time with pause, or turn-based. You have some exceptions where the game offers both, but Obsidian chose to go with real-time for Tyranny. I've personally never really understood the disdain for real-time that I often see in discussions online. I mean, I agree it doesn't work at all when used with something like the D&D or Pathfinder system, but that's because those systems were originally meant for tabletop settings where real-time wouldn't work. I mean, your average DM struggles to get 4 people to think and react when there's infinite time to do so. So imagine trying to somehow keep track of multiple enemies in real time. It's just not happening. Unsurprisingly, it doesn't translate well to the gaming medium either. In cases such as Tyranny's, though, the combat is made with real time with pause in mind, so I think it works quite well. And that's coming from someone who typically prefers turn-based combat. If you have trouble keeping up with everything that's happening in a fight, I think turning on slow motion fixes most of those issues. As for builds, I really have to give note to how much freedom there is. While not as flexible as Pillars of Eternity, Obsidian's other isometric RPG game, there's still a lot of wiggle room. If you've played D&D or Pathfinder, you know that typically your wizard is going to be a weak dude physically, with little health and little armor. Outside of specific subclasses, the only way to try to change this requires class dipping, or taking feats, or race perks. But it all feels a bit tedious and often unrewarding, like you're actively fighting the system to achieve what you have in mind. Like Josh Sawyer says, if the player wants to make an idiot muscle wizard, they should be able to do so. If you want to rock a buff, heavy armor wearing pugilist who can cast spells effectively, you're able to do so. I honestly wish more games would design their core stat systems like this. Stats affect different core modifiers, but aren't prereqs for a class itself. For a better example, in Pillars of Eternity, where preset classes are a thing, we still have different stat options. Typically, barbarians are lightly or unarmored ragers, having high health and high damage and not much else. In other games, making a barbarian of something like high intelligence is possible, but not really useful, and possibly even detrimental to your build when it comes to combat. Under the system that Tyranny and Pillars use, since stats affect character modifiers in general, rather than being tied directly to a specific class's combat mechanics, we're able to take our barbarian and spin it in different ways that go beyond just a subclass. We can still roll our Conan LARPer, but a calculated rager is also just as viable. Not to mention the lack of weapon and armor proficiencies means we aren't punished or prohibited from using certain weapon and armor types, and we don't need to waste a level up talent in order to take them. This system would also bleed into the roleplay as well. Normally your barbarian isn't going to be your party face unless you're in tabletop and your DM allows you to use strength or something for persuasion. I don't know, your yelling is just super persuasive. With this system, however, a paladin, for instance, doesn't have to be a party face, and a barbarian can easily become one. So we aren't locked into being a certain class in order to fulfill a role-playing role. All of this to say, I teeter on borderline fangirling for this sort of stat system, and I want more games to use it. When assigning or leveling up your attributes, you may wonder if there are any skill checks related to said attributes. I'll spoil a bit of the uncertainty and tell you, no, there's not. Attributes are purely related to combat and determining your starting skill levels. As for skills, it's mostly your standard affair: two-handed weapons, dual-wield weapons, unarmed, etc. The higher your skill level, the better that skill performs in combat. The only skills used in the world and dialogue are your support skills, and only 3 out of 5 of those are actually used for those checks specifically. Athletics covers everything from physical prowess, intimidation, acrobatics, and anything else related to physical dominance. Subterfuge covers everything related to sneaking, deception, cunning, and quick thinking. Lore covers everything remotely related to knowledge or understanding, knowledge of myth, knowledge of law, of customs, critical thinking, and anything else. It kind of covers a lot. On top of that, it's also used to determine what magic you can use. If you don't have enough lore for a certain spell, you aren't going to be able to cast it. It also serves at times similar to how a generic high-level speech check dialogue option would function in other games. Leveling up skills is a bit odd. You never directly put points into them, save for when you first create your character or decide to respec, but you can level them up via putting points into your attributes, through trainers, and through some talents. Skills also level up quicker based on companion perks and actively using said skills in combat. Support skills tend to level up for anyone in the party when they're used. For instance, you may not have enough subterfuge to pick a lock, but your companion does. When they pick the lock, everyone in the party gains subterfuge XP. I'm not sure if I would call the result of this a positive or a negative, but it results in you gaining a large amount of support skill XP throughout the game. You know, the very skills you use to unlock more dialogue options. Even on Bryn, who I intentionally created to have a low lore skill, ended up gaining enough XP throughout the game to unlock most of the dialogue options for it. And some of these dialogue options can entirely alter how quests play out. Regarding weapons and armor, like I said, there's no proficiencies of any sort. Any gear can be used by you or your companions, though certain skills require certain equipped weapon types to use, and certain talents only apply when using certain gear. You know, if you take an ability that lets you shoot an explosive arrow, you're not going to use it with a dagger, I'm sorry to say. Your companions are clearly meant with only 2 playstyles in mind due to how their skill trees are designed, but that doesn't mean it's impossible to do something a bit out of the box with them. Let's take Barrack, this dumb, lovable, puppy dog hunk of iron-infused flesh. I screwed that up. Is meant to serve as a melee character, either being built for tankiness or DPS, or a bit of both. However, with a nice little respec, we can turn our dear brute into a certified battle mage and still have it be viable. Again, your options are less limited than what you might assume. Abilities come from 5 sources: talents, spells, companions, artifacts, and reputation. Talents are your skill trees. As the player, you get access to multiple talent trees, each offering different ways to improve your character. You can go all in on one talent tree, split yourself between 2, or try to dip into as many as you want. However, to unlock the more useful parts of a tree, you do need to put more points into it, which means more levels. On a typical run, you'll probably reach somewhere in the ballpark of being somewhere from level 15 to 18 by the time you finish the game. I reached level 20 or so with Andril, but that's because I went out of my way to find as many encounters as possible. So your mileage varies there. There's only so many points you have to work with as a result. As mentioned, your companions only have their 2 talent trees, so there's less wiggle room in where to put your points there. Spells are spells, and while I wouldn't call it a full spell crafting system, it does have a spell modifier system. Every element has a core, such as fire requiring a core sigil. There are then sigils that give you access to different spells that relate and change depending on what your core sigil or element is. Lastly, there are modifier sigils that can alter or buff your spells in various ways. More accuracy, stronger effects, randomized damage types, etc. While present in your party, companions also offer unique abilities. These are teamwork abilities and are typically pretty powerful. If you want always easy fights, just bring Ebb. If you know, you know. Artifacts are equipment pieces that have a unique ability tied to them. Combine all of these sources together, and the game gets pretty crazy with its power scale. Reputation is a source of abilities. Every faction, major individual, and companion have 2 reputation meters, showing either their loyalty / approval or their fear / hatred towards you. As certain people or factions gain more loyalty or wrath with you, you unlock new abilities, dialogue changes, and more. It's not like most RPGs where approval is linear in one direction. The only other game I can think of that has a similar system is Dragon Age 2. It's one of the things about that game that I really enjoyed, as it allowed you to develop relationships with your companions where you could actively challenge their actions and mentality without it resulting in them leaving because you didn't pick the nice guy option enough. There are other elements that play into the combat, but some are spoilers and others are fairly self-explanatory once you begin playing the game, so I won't be covering those. So, you've got your character made. What happens now? Well, Tyranny does something a little different. Rather than plop you into the game following character creation, it loads you into Conquest mode. Conquest mode is a series of choices you can make that determine what actions you took following the time prior to the present state of the conquest of the tiers. Choices made here can genuinely follow you for the rest of the game, altering quests, changing how characters address you, and more. It's honestly very neat, and I'll be totally honest, personally, I'm a huge sucker for RPGs throwing in unique mechanics like this. It's why I love Owlcat games, or one of the many reasons, because all of their RPGs have those sort of unique side mechanics, so I'm a sucker for seeing it. That doesn't mean that this one is free of issues, however. Most of your choices during the conquest will be taking actions that either directly aid to this favor to the chorus, with the rebels also being affected by your choices as well. To jump ahead a bit, you are required to side with or against the various factions you meet throughout the tiers. Only the game doesn't give much time for you as the player to actually meet and interact with these factions before it forces you to pick a side, and you may not even know you're locking yourself into a path on a first playthrough. To try to remedy this in the case that you haven't played the game, I'm going to give a quick crash course on the various factions and their leaders. No spoilers, only enough for you to get an idea as to what they're about. When looking at a totem pole, the top is the leader, so let's talk about your ultimate big boss, Kairos. Not much is known about Kairos themselves, where they come from, if he or she is human. Kairos is almost more of a living force of will, rather than a mere person, at least in presentation. His conquest has taken over all of Tyranny, and she rules with an iron fist, though Tyranny, get it? Get the joke? Is not her only form of keeping order. Kairos' law is the backbone of the Northern Empire, and plays a big role in her conquests. As a player, it genuinely helps you to understand at least some of the laws the Empire has. Side note, this is the only RPG I can think of to actively make me care about what laws a kingdom has in its setting. I like background lore and stuff, I'm a sucker for it, but this game actually makes me fascinated with the stuff. Anyways, some of Kairos' laws are fair and good, whereas others can seem quite arbitrary and random or even downright cruel. Under the Empire, no one is allowed to go hungry, and those with wealth are required to give to those who are in need. However, if you're a merchant, what you're allowed to sell is heavily regulated, not in the illegal contraband sense. No, each year, you're given a license, and you may only sell what is covered under that license. A merchant may be a seller of food one year and a bronze merchant the next, meaning that each year they have to start their industry from scratch. Anyone with magic potential is required to go to a sanctioned guild and practice their art in a safe and legal manner, but if a mage accidentally kills another citizen, so long as they can prove in court they were performing the magic for the good of Kairos, it's perfectly legal. Entry to the old walls is forbidden, but the magical creatures known as the Bane are pouring out of them more and more, with no way to stop them without entering the old walls themselves. Learning taboo knowledge is also forbidden for the safety of the citizens, but Kairos is the sole determinant for what is taboo and what is not. Who knows what other laws there are in the Empire? I mean, they all stem from what Kairos thinks. Are drugs legal? Jaywalking? Can you say
No!
Honestly, living under Kairos is kind of like living in a playground. Except everyone is wearing this bubble shield. So you're allowed to go around and play and do things, but you can never really go beyond the sphere that's placed around you. And you can't leave the playground. Ultimately, if you aren't under the protection of Kairos, you don't benefit from any of Kairos' more peaceful rules. To give an example, there's a time in which you are summoned back to court at the behest of Tunon to settle a case. Some chorus members attempted to force themselves onto a rebel woman, and as a result, one of your fellow Fatebinders cut their careers quite short. Your job is not to determine whether the chorus was guilty, nor is it to advocate for the victim. No, your role is to determine whether or not your fellow Fatebinder should be punished. Since the woman was considered a rebel, none of Kairos' laws applied to her, which means, legally speaking, the chorus would have been allowed to commit their actions despite how horrid and vile they would be. There are a couple of options to go about this. You can follow the law as written and convict the Fatebinder. You can try to spin the blame on the chorus, or if you've got the skill, there is a third option. See, during times of war, anyone who is under whatever rebelling or enemy faction that proclaims they wish to serve Kairos is meant to immediately become protected by Kairos' law as a sort of unofficial, in-the-works citizen. You can change the outcome of the case by manipulating your fellow Fatebinder into proclaiming that the rebel was proclaiming to be a servant of Kairos. This immediately changes the legal implication. Violating a rebel is allowed, but to attempt to do so to a citizen of Kairos would immediately result in the death penalty. Since there is no evidence either way, and the entire case is just based on word against word, this further plays into the whole interpretation of the law spiel I spoke of earlier. So that's an idea of what Kairos is. Let's bust it down to the sub-factions.
Your manners do you well. All the same, we are here for justice, not pleasantries.
Tunon, my beloved, is your more direct boss. If Tunon had his way, everything would be literal, and morality and legality would mean the same thing, and function only in black and white, right or wrong. If Kairos is law, Tunon is the wind that carries it out throughout the realms. You may think he's sort of a villainous lapdog, and in some cases that's true, but there are a lot of ways you can go about dealing with him. Even if you do a good deed for the sake of enacting goodness, you can justify it within the law to Tunon, and he accepts that. He's more of a fact checker than a moral lecturer.
Don't distract me while I'm on the job, kid.
Bloodmark is the court's residential pit bull. Any enemies of the court, or those in general that Kairos wants silenced, end up having a brief discussion with Bloodin only his discussion literally amounts to him teleporting in from the shadows, saying, "Nothing personal, kid," and then stabbing you 50 times. Bledin is the Archon of Shadow, which means he can travel seemingly anywhere where shadows are present. You might think a guy like this would be an r/edge poster, but he seems surprisingly nonchalant and even a bit bored of his work. Depending on what choices you make, you'll either see Bledenmark a lot or not at all.
Time will tell if I am willing to tolerate your presence in this realm. Time and a final deed to prove your fealty.
The Pride of the North, Graven Ash and his disfavored are the strong-arm legion of Kairos' empire. Being the Archon of War, Ash is quite fixated on it, leading his stalwart legion against whoever Kairos points him at. In the past, Ash had actually rebelled against Kairos, putting up such a good fight that Kairos offered to promote him if he surrendered. Ash's surrender was less about the glory of Kairos and more about his troops. Ash realized that there was no way he was going to win against the Empire, and only agreed to surrender as a means to preserve the lives of his followers. Following his surrender, whatever name the disfavored had prior was stricken from history, their heraldry tattered, and their now and current title being the disfavored. As the Archon of War, Ash is able to literally protect his soldiers from harm, shielding them from attacks that would kill a regular person. Ash's love for his soldiers is so great that he knows all of them by name and looks. However, the love Ash has for his soldiers does not translate to everyone else.
You think it doesn't piss me off? Let me tell you, I'm ready to kill people.
The disfavored are comprised entirely of those who are the descendants of the original followers of Ash back from the rebellion. For the disfavored, Northern supremacy isn't just a catchphrase, it's a fact of life.
Talking to artificials. I'm talking to originals now. I'm talking to originals. Please respect the chats.
If you're on the receiving end of a disfavored march, even as a citizen, at worst, you and your entire family will be eradicated. At best, you'll wind up in a slave camp somewhere.
We will have your bones fashioned into a scepter, your skin knotted into a belt, and your tongue fed to crows. At least crows know the meaning of respect and gratitude.
Archon of Secrets, Devourer of Souls, Madman, Lunatic, Imbecile. Many titles describe and yet fail to describe the nature of the voices of Narat. Being able to absorb someone into their very being, the voices of Narat are less of an individual, but a mass of peoples compressed into one psychedelic, schizophrenic head. His actions are seemingly random, but there's a brutal method to that ever-changing madness. The Scarlet Chorus are a wave of flesh, being composed of various peoples with various identities, heritages, and all walks of life, forced into a writhing mass of conquest and violence. Ironically, though, as a Tearsman, the Chorus would be your only real hope of survival, since the Chorus tends to recruit anything it can get its hands on. Under the Chorus, you forsake your former identity and work to stay alive, since your own supposed allies are just as likely to gut you than anyone else. But hey, you take what you can get.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part. I'm doing my part. I didn't do fucking shit.
Being a rebel, in this case, just means anyone who isn't actively serving Kairos. The Sages are rebels, the Unbroken are rebels, the Beastmen are rebels. I'm sure even the plants could be considered rebels too. To say the rebels are a unified force would be a large overstatement. Prior to present circumstances, the Tearsmen were constantly at war with each other. When Kairos did finally begin expanding into the Tiers, the nations did nothing to unify against Kairos, each one hoping that Kairos would wipe out the others, while still allowing themselves to remain untouched. They may view Kairos as a militant conqueror, but it's not too different from what they were doing to each other prior to his arrival. The North views the Southern Tiers as this sort of backwater realm, entirely insignificant. If you look closer, though, the South is filled with unique cultures, has its own fascinating and functioning set of laws, and had one of the best places of knowledge with the Vellum Citadel. For the Tearsmen, the arrival of Kairos doesn't just mean some new ruler, it means the total decimation of their people, their identity, and their way of life. They're not some inherently more virtuous collective of peoples, just different. Without spoiling anything yet, I think the story is really good. There's a lot of options for roleplay and various ways to go about the different situations that the game throws at you. Even when siding with your respective faction, there's still a lot of varying choices that can be made within each path, and the game acknowledges and accommodates all the various ways and motivations your character has for doing things. It's a nice touch that really sells the setting, not just doing something, but being given the choice to determine why your character is doing something. Let's check back in on our three stooges from earlier. Andrew worked a lot with the Tearsmen, using them as a tool to discover evidence and wrongdoing between the various factions and the conquest as a whole. His goal was also to ready the Tears for Kairos' conquest with as little bloodshed as possible. He certainly didn't hate the Tearsmen and even respected them, but he also didn't hate Kairos or Kairos' armies. If he could talk someone down, he would. If he could get an honest compromise, he would. Just because someone was an enemy politically, that did not equate to them no longer being a person. However, he knew that when dealing with the major players in the tiers, that the best way to get useful information out of them was to let them incriminate themselves. While peace was his preference, he understood violence as a useful necessity, and tried to make decisions based on what he felt was best in the long run, even if it meant getting dirty in the present. Bryn was a soldier at heart, and if it weren't for Tunon's recruitment, he would have stood amongst the greatest of Graven Ash's warriors, and proudly so. He viewed the disfavored as in-laws, not the ones you avoid during the holidays, but the ones you look forward to seeing every year. Anything and everything he could do to aid the disfavored, he would do, even if that meant going against the court at times. His loyalty to the disfavored was so great, one wonders if he would side with Ash if he ever decided to rebel against Kairos again. It certainly was a question he asked himself often, and one he hoped no one would ever ask of him. He didn't hate the Southerners, but knew that their place was beneath the North. For Bryn, murdering your enemies wasn't personal, it's just politics. Fjord cared not for politics. In fact, it's quite difficult to determine if he cared about anything beyond his own personal revenge against Kairos. I mean, I'm not one to question Tunon, but I really have to wonder what the plan was in hiring a dude who was literally raised by beastmen. What did you expect from an Ann Prim LARPer? Vibes? Essays? The moment he was let free into the tiers, he worked to cause as much suffering to everyone that he could because he was evil, twisted, and misunderstood. In other words, just your average murder hobo, but cooler because I was the one who was playing him.
I don't want peace. I want problems, always.
What's nice is that the free characters I just described to you are all genuine paths you can play in this game. Not play as in, well, in my headcanon, my OC is XYZ, PP poo poo, but actual paths with various decisions, acknowledgements, and content given to you by the game. Even the murder hobo path, which normally is something you can do in RPGs, gets its own fully fledged path in this game. I really respect the devs putting all this time and effort into the factions, the choices, the dialogue, etc., only to respect the player enough to not only allow, but fully facilitate a path where you just say, fuck you, I don't care, to all of it. I think that covers the gist of everything. So if you don't want spoilers and ramblings on power and other abstract concepts, go to here. To clarify, Andrul sided with the rebels, Bryn sided with the disfavored, and Fjord went on the anarchist path. See, at the end of Act 1, once you capture Vendrian's Well, you are locked into one of 4 main paths, or alliances. The rebels, the disfavored, the chorus, and anarchist are your options. The rebels and the anarchist path are a bit tricky to choose on a first playthrough and can seem a bit arbitrary to achieve them in Act 1. For the rebels, you have to release/be nice to every rebel group you encounter. This was actually my hope on my very first playthrough, but I ended up killing one of the rebel leaders since I thought that there would be consequences for letting her go free in full view of both of Kairos' main forces, which resulted in this sort of botched, disfavored anarchist path. For the anarchist path, you may notice while playing that there are multiple moments where you can choose to betray your alliance, regardless of who you are currently siding with. Picking this option at any point technically puts you on the anarchist path. However, if you betray your alliance right after you capture Vendrian's Well, then you unlock a unique path where you work with Bled and Mark. If you plan on sticking it to every faction in the game, I recommend doing it this way. Otherwise, you miss out on both the faction content and the actual anarchist content. You may be wondering, but what about Tunon? Well, Tunon is a unique faction in a way, as you can technically side with him on every playthrough save for full-blown anarchist, I think. Act 1 is entirely about stopping everyone from getting blown up. Literally. The moment you enter the Valley of Vendrian's Well, Kairos traps you and everyone else inside, proclaiming that unless the Valley Spire is claimed by the Day of Swords, the Edict will just flat out nuke everyone inside. Very kind and considerate of her.
What I will ask you though is, can you give me one more day? I'm not asking you for a week, I'm not asking you for a month, I'm not asking you for a year. Can you give me one more day?
No matter who you go with, the end of Act 1 results in you claiming the Spire, and as a nice bonus, the Spire, you know, the one that's been dormant for who knows how long, comes alive at your presence. I wonder if this will have any significance in the plot later on. Anyways, after the Spire is yours, your faction allies will want to meet you, and Tunon will want to see you, and you dare not refuse. Unless you're Fjord, who literally ignored Tunon for the entire game, LMAO. Going to Tunon gives you a new objective. Gather evidence to implicate either Graven Ash or the Voices of Nerat as guilty of causing chaos and various other betrayals against Kairos during the conquest against the Tiers. Your trinity of objectives is to now aid your faction, gather evidence, and claim the remaining spires, with different side quest and companion stuff thrown in there as well. For each region you go to, an edict is in place. As you complete each region, you resolve more edicts, absorbing their power and gaining more power as a result. As for your allies, the rebels want you to help them gather more allies. The disfavored want you to help them kill off more rebels, and the anarchist just doesn't care, only seeking more artifacts to further their own power. I am a bit biased towards the rebel path, primarily because it allows you to choose more directions than the other path. The disfavored and the chorus already have preset allies that you assist, but the rebel path allows you to choose which groups you want to add to your humble collective. For instance, Andrul's alliance by the end consisted of the Forgebound, Magical Blacksmiths, the Earthshakers, who were the disfavored Masters of Earth Magic, and the Unbroken, which are the remnants of Stalwart's surviving military force. However, he could have recruited the Sages instead, a collective of knowledge hoarders and chroniclers, or maybe the Bronze Brotherhood, a massive mercenary company fighting force, or even a beastman tribe. There's a lot of choices in there on who to take with you that the other paths simply don't get. Fast forward to the end of Act 2, after claiming some spires, ending some edicts and whatnot, our original spire is attacked by an army of whoever is most pissed at you at the moment. It's at this moment, as you look out at the enemy forces from atop your spire, that it decides to fully awaken. Seeing this, you decide that the spire is telling you that you should really try casting an edict because, hey, why not? Well, sure enough, you do it, and it works. The enemy force is almost entirely obliterated, and after you clean up the stragglers, you win, taking you into the final act. The days following your edict casting come with two main revelations. For one, you are officially an Archon now, titled To Be Determined. It's clear you can channel edicts of your own and end the ones Kairos has casted before you. Also, Kairos has now declared that only one Archon may rule in the tiers. Not every Archon needs die, but those who won't die must either make the others submit or submit to them in turn. However, what's interesting is that this is not an edict, just a regular order. While Kairos could probably give an edict, there's no telling how your powers would react to it, and even so, an edict isn't needed as human nature will sort the issue out anyways. It's at this point where your faction choices come to fruition. If you sided with the disfavored, Graven Ash will back you. If you went with the chorus, the Voices of Narat will do the same. Tunon calls you to court for two trials. The first is to implicate at least one of the other two Archons as guilty of sabotaging the war effort. If you're on the rebel path, it really doesn't matter who you convict, but if you're siding with one of the two big boys, it would make the most sense not to pass a death sentence on the one you're trying to be friends with. Assuming that all goes well, Tunon tells you that it's you who is under trial now. What for? The same thing you were just tasked with doing to the other two Archons. Only you have the added difficulty of trying to explain why you're suddenly claiming ancient towers and sucking up the Overlord's power from his teat. This encounter is genuinely my favorite boss fight in any RPG game. Everything you've done or not done, your actions, your motivation, your playstyle, it all gets thrown back at you in the final chance to show Tunon that not only have you been doing your job, you've been the only competent person in the room 99% of the time. This encounter has one of my favorite roleplay acknowledgements I've ever seen a game give as well. Andrew mostly did not interrupt during any conversations where he felt he could get evidence on one of the two factions, and this may seem like a small thing, but Tunon actually recognizes this, asks you if you were too stupid and scared to speak, and you can tell him that you were genuinely playing some 5D chess by letting others incriminate themselves, and it's just so peak. If you're found innocent, Tunon submits to you. Bloodmark goes, I'm gonna blend all over the place, and attempts to murder you, unless you're an anarchist in which the roles do actually get reversed. Go sort out the other two Archons depending on your alliance, and bam, the end of the game. Now, the ending is a bit weird, but I'm gonna be a bit of a tease and make you wait before we reach the true conclusion. We've got some concepts to discuss first. Welcome to class, kiddos. Remember how I asked, what is truth? Well, within the context of tyranny, I think we also need to address what power is. Yes, power is a mechanic in the game, but it also heavily ties into the idea of power as a concept. I'm not going to show any footage because I don't want to bother any copyright shenanigans, but if you've seen the first few seasons of Game of Thrones, you'll recall that the various characters end up defining what they believe constitutes the origins of power. I'm going to spin you my personal understanding of power. Trust me, this is relevant to the game and not me coping by getting a bad BA degree or something. Let's take power as a concept. See, there it is, all imposing and whatnot. I think of power as three interconnected subcategories that form a whole. So in practice, these subcategories are power of action, power of belief, and power of knowledge. Power of action represents someone or something's literal capacity to cause real-world change. Power of belief represents the presence, strength, direction, and alignment of belief in relation to someone or something. Power of knowledge represents an understanding of someone or something that guides where you place your belief and what actions you take in relation. So how does this relate to Kairos? Well, throughout the game, we learn that while Archons do have some semblance of their powers to begin with, their abilities are further fueled by understanding and belief in them. Graven Ash did not originally have the ability to heal his soldiers, but even from the earliest days, those under his command swore that they felt genuinely emboldened merely by his presence. As his victories grew in number and his army more confident, his pride in his soldiers began to manifest into the abilities he has now. As for Kairos, let's view her through this understanding of power. In the power of action, Kairos clearly has some real ability to channel powerful magics into what we know as edicts, capable of causing seemingly whatever consequence Kairos deems, unless the edict is fulfilled and therefore ended. For the power of belief, those who believe in Kairos' rule, who believe in Kairos' power, only further fuel Kairos' ability to rule and to shape the realms as he sees fit. Finally, for the power of knowledge, Kairos determines what is and what is not allowed to be known about them, and those that understand what Kairos is capable of tend to fuel their belief in his power. These three combined almost make Kairos into a god of sorts, where their ability to cast edicts is their divine wrath, their followers' belief fueling those powers, and understanding and adherence to his commandments reinforces belief, which reinforces the power of action. And then there's you. Through actions you could not have possibly understood the consequences of, have entirely shaken the known dogma of who and what Kairos is and what they represent. You can not only end Kairos' edicts, you can absorb their power and channel said power in such a way that directly challenges what the Overlord can do. You're not just some Archon of a random talent. You're an Archon that can tell a god no and not immediately die in the process of doing so. Many times during the game, the idea is reinforced that Kairos is supposed to be this almost all-knowing and all-planning figure where nothing ever happens by mistake or without their knowledge. In Warhammer, there's a character named Kairos Fateweaver. His shtick is that he can see into the past and into the future, but never into the present, which means he can't truly predict what will happen in the moment. In this sense,
Step off! Step out! Shit! They jumping me! They jumping me! Save your boy!
In this sense, Kairos and Kairos are the same. When Kairos sends you to proclaim the edict in Act 1, you were never intended to actually succeed in ending it. It is known that after this conquest, Kairos would have zero use for a zealot Archon of War and a madman Archon of Secrets. Kairos allowing everyone to die at the end of Act 1 was the plan, in my opinion. That would solidify that anyone, be they friend or foe, who fails or resists Kairos only ever meets with one certain end: death. In the present, though, how could Kairos have accounted for you? For all intents and purposes, you were a nobody in the grand scheme of things. Just another Fatebinder there to do their job. How could anyone have predicted that not only would you be able to end the edict, but also gain access to powers such as these? The two armies of the Overlord were so incompetent, nobody expected you to to be the only adult in the room, and yet that's what happened. You alone changed the tiers in whatever way you see fit, as everyone else remains stagnant. Even when Kairos demands only one Archon should rule the tiers, is it really that believable that they would predict you could do something such as making both Graven Ash and Tunon submit to your rule entirely? I don't think so. Kairos is not a god. For all their mystique and their power, they are what all Archons are at heart. They're human, and humans make mistakes. So what is truth? Well, truth is now becoming what you deem it shall be. Your word is the law, and that is because you now have the power to make it so. In a world without universal truth, it can only ever be defined by those who have the power to define it. And because of that, you represent the biggest threat that Kairos has ever come across. I think I've rambled on for long enough. Can't imagine there's anything else to talk about. That's totally it, right? Right? Yeah, the game has DLC, and I don't like it. So I'm gonna skim through it. Bastard's Wound, what is it? In short, a portion of the old walls was split open when the Archon of Stone caused some state-sanctioned population transfer there, and people have begun living inside a settlement they made in the cracks. Legally, the settlement is arguably not allowed to exist, but it's isolated so most people don't know about it. A sage from the Wound sends you a missive and urges you to go there to meet her. The settlement is in a tense split between a forge-bound named Jaspus and a tidecaster named Wagstaff. There used to be a beast woman, Reef Talon, who led the settlement, and she had the ability to heal those she touched. Only those whom she healed developed a condition where they can no longer sleep, thus becoming the Sleepless. As a result of this curse, Reef Talon fled deep into the old walls, and the Sleepless followed. The settlement has two main problems: a bad water supply and no leader. Very early on, you'll decide, perhaps without knowing it, who you want to side with. I recommend fixing the water issue first, otherwise it will quickly get locked out of completion. If you decide to rescue Reef Talon, you need to undergo the process of finding every mural in the old walls and picking every correct dialogue option with talking to her, otherwise you don't get a very good ending. You can decide to rule the settlement yourself, but this will always fail. You can also just say screw it and purge the settlement for legal reasons. There's also this weird Bane creature that the Sleepless worship that you can't even interact with if you decide to help Reef Talon. The DLC is kind of a mess. It's not that bad in isolation. There's some good side quests, some stuff for your companions. It just that it feels really rushed and lacks the good writing the rest of the game has. Not to mention, fighting the Bane is just boring no matter how you shake it, and you fight them a lot in this DLC. The Bane are easily the worst part about this game in my eyes. They're visually meh, and once you fight them once, you fight them every time. The DLC also does not affect the main story in any way whatsoever. Overall, it's okay, but not good. I recommend either doing it as soon as it unlocks, or right before you end the game. Speaking of the end of the game, let's get back to that. At the end of it all, you stand atop your spire, where your final choice presents itself, and it's kind of a weird one. Regardless of your choices, the game pretty much lays out that the Overlord is going to view you as a threat, and isn't going to tolerate you. Even if you personally don't have an issue with Kairos, it's not really going to be up to you. which makes it weird that there's an option to submit to Kairos at the end of the game. The default ending is that you rebel, pick your favorite flavor of edict, and cast it so that it spans the entire Northern Kingdoms, halting Kairos' advancing armies and solidifying yourself as more than a pushover. The option to submit to Kairos isn't something that I would have issue with on paper, but in execution it feels wrong. I guess the devs thought so too, as the option to submit to Kairos wasn't even present when the game first launched. This reflects in the dialogue too. Like, Tunon is literally telling you that you're better than Kairos and that he wants to work with you in order to establish a new empire, assuming he submits to you, of course. I'm normally actually kind of a fan of RPGs that allow the player to give up their accrued power at the end of the game, but it just doesn't really work here. No matter what, Kairos is inevitably going to try to kill you, over and over and over again because of what you can do. So rebellion feels like an inevitability more than a choice, which is what I believe was going for. Change itself is inevitable, and oftentimes those who find themselves in a position to make true change did not actively seek out the ability to do so, and that's you in this case. Regardless of your motivations, even if you went full murder hobo, or even if you felt that you could make a better society than Kairos, it's almost akin to war and conquest being a cycle. No matter how slowly it happens, people conquer and people get conquered. Kairos might seem like a tyrant now to the Tearsmen, but what about those who he conquered centuries ago, who the only thing about Kairos they know is that they have to follow his laws? Every good society is built upon the bones of those who died to achieve it. And even if you're a great idealist, what do you in the end decide to do? You launch a nationwide edict causing who knows how much destruction upon the Northern Empire. How many innocents and whatnot whose lives are ruined as a result of what you did, so that in the grand scheme of things, you can try to make a better society than the one you're rebelling against. I think that message of cyclical conquest as an inevitability is much more interesting and much more realistic within the framework of the story than just sort of saying, no, it's cool, me and Kairos be chillin', but that's just my opinion. So that's the story in a nutshell. There's a lot left I could talk about, but I've rambled on long enough. Let's just go to the conclusion. Ultimately, I love this game a lot. I think it's a must-try for anyone who likes RPGs. It's a genuine shame there likely isn't ever going to be a sequel, as the game pretty clearly sets up for one. I mean, imagine what else is out there in Tyranny. Naked warriors who ride spiders, frost witches in an ice kingdom, not to mention what lands could lie beyond the continent itself. I never encountered any major bugs, though at times the pacing can feel a bit weird. But the game itself is just so good that I hardly ever notice it. And part of why I only noticed it this time around is just because of how much I played it in such a short amount of time for this video. Apologies that this one took a bit. I'm definitely going to be doing something shorter next time, just to give the old noggin a rest. See ya.